Uh, Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. We all appreciate your being here. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced today that Israel plans to go ahead with its offensive in Rafah. I wonder if you could address the health implications for that, being that there are 1.2 or 1.3 million people still displaced in Rafah.
Maybe I can start, and my colleagues, I'm sure, will add to this. But this is probably the worst crisis that can happen within this war, if it happened. I hope and pray that it will not happen, and that the pressure from the international community will stop this offensive, because the 1.3 or 1.5 million people in Rafah has no other place to go, have no other place to go. So there's 2 hospitals in Rafah. There are thousands of tents. The first thing that when you enter Rafah, you will see thousands of tents everywhere, where you have 10 to 20 people cramped in every tent. And you have also these schools, on our schools, that were converted to shelters. So in every class, you have 40 to 50 people. In the south and the east, you have the border with Egypt that is very difficult to get through, impossible to get through. Then you have the Mediterranean in the west, and then you have Khan Yunis in the north, which is also a theater of fighting and bombs and missiles. So there's no place for this population to leave. That means if there's any offensive, then you're gonna have a bloodbath. You're gonna have massacres after massacres. Besides, of course, the deterioration of the health center related to the collapse of the healthcare system. Pregnant women will die because of bleeding. Neonatal will die because of lack of care. Patients who have diarrhea will die of dehydration, and many other things that related to the absence of access to healthcare. So there were some estimates that 250,000 people will die in case that there is escalation of the current war, escalation of the status quo. 250,000 people die directly and indirectly in case that there is escalation or Rafah offensive. And that's a biblical number, and we hope that it will not happen.
I'll just add a couple of things to that. In Rafah, there's a single governmental hospital, which is Al Najah Hospital, which has got 60 beds. There's a small private hospital called Kuwaiti Hospital with 20 beds, and I think the MSF hospital is 100? 80. So that's for a population of well over 1 million now, and if there's a ground invasion of Rafah, it'll be apocalyptic, really, the number of deaths that we're going to see. And of course, as we're seeing, they'll be told to evacuate and move somewhere safe, and there is that, as we've heard, there is nowhere safe for them to go. There's no intensive care beds in Rafah. There's, I think, 5 operating theatres, 6 operating theatres for that population. So the healthcare system cannot cope with the work now. It'll be inestimably worse if there is an invasion of Rafah.
Ibtisam?
Hi, my name is Ibtisam Azim, Al Arabi Jadid newspaper. I have two questions. The first one about the mental health issue, and that people are like doctors, nurses, the medical staff is facing. Is there any services that any of the people that COVID in could support them? Could you say more into that? And also in your tours and in your meetings with politicians and decision makers, which reactions are you hearing, whether in the US or other Western countries? Are they understanding how difficult it is, or what the gravity of the situation? And why do you think that there's not much room to put more pressure on Israel to stop the war and to have a ceasefire? Thank you.
I can speak to your first question and then leave the next to one of my colleagues. In terms of mental health, the teams that are on the ground, especially the many actors that have been working in Gaza for many, many years, we have teams that are trying to provide mental health services. It's very difficult though, because many of those teams are themselves victims of trauma, and that makes this an ongoing battle for us. Our doctors, our nurses, our healthcare workers, the cleaners, anyone who works in the healthcare system, they are completely exhausted. And on top of that, they have to worry about the safety and security of their own families. They're dealing with the losses of their own homes. And they have all of this going on in their minds while they're trying to carry out very heroic acts with their patients. So they are, there are some that have definitely displayed signs of acute stress. There are, and who we try, I know for our teams, and I'm sure the other teams, where you try to give them breaks. Part of it is that they want to keep working because that serves somehow as a therapeutic methodology for them. There are others who simply can't work, and we have to be obviously very patient with that and accepting of that, because it's absolutely understandable. For the patients, they are completely traumatized. We have many patients that come for primary care consultations just to be able to talk, just to be able to get some kind of TLC, some sort of care, and compassion. The mental health needs are astronomical and will be going on for many years. Among our staff, we have two things that concern them. It's my children today and my home tomorrow. And this is something that preoccupies them. And what we've seen in the past is that people who will come for mental health consultations, they come for their children and they stay for themselves. And right now we're seeing people are coming for their children and for themselves. It's just that dire.
You know, there's a phrase in Gaza that I heard while I was there that people kept repeating, and I think it underscores this, the mental health needs. But many people would say there's a war after the war.
Yeah.
There's a war after the war, and it's a day of reckoning for the people to think about everything that they've lost, all of the struggles that they've been through. And that's why I find it really cruel and unusual to talk about a Rafah offensive. People have been displaced multiple times, and so this is something that I think many NGOs are thinking about and are concerned about. I will mention that the first mental health delegation will be entering the Gaza Strip in April. So foreign mental health professionals are going to try to support the mental health professionals that are on the ground in April. And as far as your second question goes, I think we've found that many of the delegations that we've met here are aware of the humanitarian catastrophe that's taken place. We are trying to support that with our eyewitness testimony. We're trying to drive the point home, but we also are trying to communicate the urgency. Oftentimes what we can see is there can be a paralysis by analysis. There can be a lot of deliberations that take place. We just want to press upon the people who are at the table that this is very urgent and we need things to change within the next few hours or days, not weeks.
On mental health, Global provides mental health support incorporated in the medical points and the clinics that we have in Rafah. And we run about 10 medical points. Medical points means a clinic inside a shelter or an IDP camp. And it's run by local doctors and nurses. So in every one of them, we have someone who provides some kind of mental health support, usually mental health first aid to patients inside the camp or the shelter. And also, just last week, we sent a team that is focused on training the trainers, on community leaders in the same camp, because you have a huge number of people who are traumatized. So no matter how many specialists you send, not gonna be enough. So you need to train the teachers, the camp leaders on mental health. And they did that training, and the next step would be to provide them with medications, because there is no medications to treat depression and PTSD and anxiety. And as Dr. Thayer mentioned, you know, what's happening right now, and we've seen that in Syria and in Ukraine, that people are moving from place to place because of the war and the violence. They're focusing on survival and coping with everything that they have to survive. But after the war ends, you will see a lot of PTSD and depression and anxiety, and that's the time when there's such an intervention. On your second question,
Just one more note on the mental health, which is to say, as Dr. Zahar is saying, it's very difficult to do psychotherapy in an active war zone. So you really are only left with psychological first aid. All of our organizations are trying to integrate that mental health component into our work. We do have access to psychiatrists and drugs, but with the war ongoing, it's a drop in the bucket.
The reaction of the member states basically represents the policies of their countries. So we noticed that there's very warm reception and reaction from Ireland, for example, from South Africa, from Slovenia, from Malta. But in general, I think everyone was receptive to the stories that we had, and I think it's important to put faces on the numbers and the reports that people are receiving.
Thank you. This is Dr. Hamid Sayan from the Arabic Daily Al Quds Al Arabi. My first question is about how do you evaluate the whole thing? And give it a title other than genocide? And the second, how do the people in Gaza perceive the international community and the UN and the Secretary General and Secret Gag and all those UN officials who, some of them try to blame the victim, like Karim Khan and Pramila Patten, who put more blame on the Palestinians. So, thank you.
I spent some time a while ago looking up the definition of genocide in a variety of dictionaries, and what is going on in Gaza fulfills every single definition of genocide that I have read. So there's no doubt in my mind that's what's going on, and I think the end game, it appears to those of us who've been on the ground there, and indeed, more importantly, is the view that all the Gazans I've spoken to, is that the end game of the Israeli government is to force them out completely from Gaza, to eradicate them from that land. So I don't think there's any doubt in my mind, and we've brought this up at government levels in the United Kingdom, and I think received fairly short shrift from them about using that term. But and of course this is subject to the international cases being brought by South Africa. But at the very, very least, whether you agree it's genocide or not, there is a very clear, strong argument that it needs to be questioned as to whether it's genocide. In response to your second question about what do they all feel, well,